Hey, welcome to this session of Create Good. Today we have Mary Parry from Parry Communications, and she is going to be talking about advancing your advocacy message. If you'd like to ask questions, you can ask a question in the question panel on the side. So you just toggle that down and ask a question, or you can raise your hand and I will unmute you and you can ask it live. So thank you again, Mary, for joining us, and go ahead and take it away.
All right. Thank you, Dawn, and thank you to everyone who's here today to talk about advancing your advocacy message. I would have much preferred being in a big room with all of you, but I totally am on board with staying home and staying safe. Let me get rid of my little image here. So let's get to it. Let's talk about why you're here, which is raising your voice in this really important time. I'll start out with just a caveat. I am not a lawyer. I am happy to not be a lawyer, even though I totally love and appreciate lawyers. And luckily for nonprofits here in North Carolina, you have the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits that offer, actually, if you contact them, they can connect you with a free hour of pro bono legal services for any questions that you have as you sort of navigate your path in raising your voice on issues you care about. So that's my caveat. Here's a little bit about who I am. I am I have been an advocacy director, a development director, a communications director. I've worked at local nonprofits and I worked at statewide nonprofits. I think that rather than Lady Liberty, a better statue to represent who I feel like I am at work is Fearless Girl. So I think a lot of you probably have a little bit of Fearless Girl in you, or a lot, because you're out there advocating for the nonprofits and the issues that you care about. And that is not easy work, and it's really important work. And if not for you standing up and saying, this is important, let's move forward, then we wouldn't maybe make the progress that we need to. So thank you for what you do. In my free time, I'm a huge fan of civic engagement. I try to weave that into my work time whenever I can. It's super important, and it's so important to me that I wrote a children's book about it. Here's my little, if I can advance here, there we go. Sadie McGrady runs for president. My daughter inspired me to write it when she was doing some civic engagement work. So I love seeing kids flex those skills, and I love advocating for more women running for office. I'm guessing if I were in a room with you here today, I would meet a bunch of you and think that you should also run for office with all the experience and leadership skills that you have. So that's a little bit about me. So why raise your voice? You're a nonprofit organization. You're already doing advocacy at some level. So I think this picture is a really good image of kind of how we feel about the political discourse in our country. So why in the world would you want to weigh into that fray? Well, there's a lot of good reasons. The issues that you care about aren't going away in this divided country, in our super purple state. It definitely feels like it's time to engage. And something we'll talk about a little bit later in the webinar is the lack of civic engagement in our country and in our state. You'll be surprised at some of the numbers that I'll share with you. So raising your voice even about civic engagement is a really great way to raise up your advocacy. So you are already political, even if you're not thinking of yourself as political as a nonprofit leader. The term political means relating to the government or public affairs of a country. And of course, your budgets, often part of your budgets come from the government, and your supporters and your clients are part of your community who are also impacted by the things that go on in our political world. So you are political, and now you're deciding, how can I navigate the legal world of how a 501c3 can be a little bit more political. So the first thing that we think of when we think of raising our voices is not wanting to put our tax exempt status at risk. So that right there is the wording from the IRS about that your board members might read to you when you're talking about wanting to speak up a little bit more on issues. We love our board members because they keep us out of trouble. They keep us from taking risks that we shouldn't, and they do a lot more besides that too. But we do often get some pushback if we want to maybe push the envelope a little, and so understanding the rules around what a 501c3 can do will help you educate your board members and your staff and help you stay comfortably within the lines of the legalities of speaking up. So let's just talk about I'm going to move this little window. Let's talk about just the broad overview of the rules. And again, not a lawyer, but as someone who's worked in this field, this little really simple arrow diagram shows you kind of the 3 areas you want to think about when you're speaking up. So in which areas do you want to speak up? So electioneering, which you probably don't use that term quite a bit, but political campaign intervention. That is specifically not allowed for 501c3s, and that's a super black and white issue. It's really clear what those activities are, and it's really easy to stay away from those. So you cannot support or oppose candidates. So of course you know this, you can't be for a candidate or against a candidate and speak up in that way. And that goes for making campaign contributions too, which is nice because you want the funding for you. So not even privately, because of course candidates do report who makes donations to them. And you also cannot do either of those activities for political parties. So you wouldn't want to speak up for or against a political party or make a campaign or a contribution to a political party as an organization. Of course, as private citizens, you can, and you can navigate amongst your own organization what kind of rules or guidelines you tend to follow for those private activities. Now, the middle item, lobbying. Lobbying, yes, you can do, but in a limited way. Unfortunately, this is more of a gray area when it comes to the law and how it's written. I believe the word that they use is an inadequate or insufficient amount of lobbying can be done, or sort of a tiny limited amount can be done. It's not a specific number. Again, if you go to the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits for help, you can learn more about filing a 501H that will help you with your, kind of reporting and figuring out how much of your activities would be lobbying. But lobbying, to think about what is lobbying before you get down that road, because most nonprofit organizations aren't going to come anywhere close to the limit that you might have on lobbying, because lobbying is pretty specific. Lobbying is speaking up about legislation, like a specific, like I want you to vote yes on House Bill 55. House Bill 55 will really help my clients or my supporters. Very few nonprofits get into this realm, and it's often because they're worried about, edging up against their limits of lobbying and losing their 501c3 status. So what you can do is advocate, which you're already doing with your clients and supporters. You're telling your story. You're educating them. You're helping people understand what your mission's all about and what are the unmet needs in your community that you're fighting to fill. You can educate, as opposed to saying vote yes on House Bill 55, you might say, I want you to know that in North Carolina, 590,320 people struggle with hunger. So in our state, this is a fact from the food bank in North Carolina that I pulled from their webpage. So this is a fact that they would want, I'm guessing, legislators to know about, so that when they are addressing bills in the House or the Senate, that they will understand how big the problem is and try to do something about it. So you're already out there advocating in your communities. These are some pictures I've just pulled from Facebook this morning. We've got Book Harvest there on the upper left. They're out there trying to get kids and families books in their homes so that they can keep fostering literacy. And of course, that impacts the world of public education. We've got on the right, on the upper right, Community Home Trust. Community Home Trust is working in the field of affordable housing. They're helping people find homes that they can afford to live in, which we know is a growing problem. Then the lower left, there's the food bank again. They're out there making sure that people who are hungry are getting access to food. And then the lower right, we've got a Durham nonprofit that's working in environmental cleanup. I believe it's Keep Durham Beautiful. So they're working in the environmental space. So I'm sure they're along the way will become in CGA some legislation that might impact their communities they might want to speak up on, or your organization might want to speak up on similar issues. And that's how you'll take this sort of community activity that you're already doing and advocate at the higher level, at the General Assembly level, or perhaps talking to your mayor or your town council. So let's just go through the basics of nonprofit advocacy. Your usual audience is your clients, right? Your usual ask of them is to let us help you with your unmet needs. So they're a popular audience that we're always talking to. We're also talking to our community. We want our community to learn about how that important unmet need is impacting our community. So we often connect with our community and we want to make them aware of what's going on and ask for their help. We ask for their help because we want them to volunteer and donate their time to advance your mission. And we want them to donate their money so that you can keep doing the great work that you do and make, even bigger and better strides to address those unmet needs. But who are we not talking to? And this is where we get into next level advocacy. So elected officials, as we just talked about, lobbying is something you can do, and that's when you're talking about a specific legislation, but you may certainly also educate them. You can educate just like you do your community. They're part of your community, so you can educate elected officials about, and another particular reason they were elected to serve their constituents, and you're just making sure of all the issues that they have in front of them, that yours is one that they know about. So we'll talk about some ways you can do that. Also make sure you are talking to business leaders. You probably often do this to fill your board so that you can reach out to a broader audience of donors and community stakeholders. But think about educating them, because they also are often in the audience of elected officials and other decision makers. So talking to business leaders specifically in a targeted way about your issues, making sure they're educated about your issues, can be a way that you can further your cause. And of course, the media. You probably talk to the media when you have an upcoming fundraising event or something big is happening in the news about your issue. So think about the media strategically as you think about your next level advocacy. Think about offering yourself as an expert. If they were to have a panel discussion about an issue, especially if one is bubbling up in the legislature, you don't have to speak up on that issue if you don't feel comfortable inching closer to your lobbying limit. You could certainly say, hey, I'll be the issue expert for you on your panel. I won't speak to the specific policy that you're addressing, but I will speak to the issue that my organization is an expert on. So we'll talk about some ways you can do that. So let's think through your advocacy campaign. There's no perfect way to do it, and you're likely already doing campaigns of some sort. You're thinking about how to address your audiences and what to say and which methods to use. So let's look at like 5 overview questions of that you'll ask yourself as you start to think through your advocacy campaign. Oops, sorry. So who is your audience? Your audience, of course, as we just talked about, is typically your clients, your supporters, your board, your donors. But let's broaden that out and think about our media, our legislators, and as you're building that campaign, think about ways that you can connect with those communities through the tools that you have, and think about your most effective message. So really honing in on what is the issue you want to advocate for. We need to invest in early childhood education because it will provide great strides for those kids as they start seeking jobs. Whatever your issue is and your the main issue that you want to raise your voice about, start thinking about the best way to say it. And one thing we'll talk about in just a minute is just the caveat of election years, staying away from messaging that candidates or parties are using if that's an issue that really impacts your organization, just to kind of stay away from looking like you are collaborating at any way with a political candidate or a party. Obviously, you probably are not, but sometimes if your constituents think that you are, that could be what you care about more if your donors are worried that you're crossing a line and you're not. So if it's something you talk about all the time and it's messaging you always use, it's absolutely fine, but just being cautious of that during the election year, just to protect your 501c3 status. Then think about your approach to advocacy. So this image of Greta Thunberg is not intended to make fun of her at all. I adore her. The images here are to help you think through, are you going to take more of an aggressive approach, which Greta is taking on the climate? She says the climate crisis is real, it's a problem, and we've got to wake up and do something about this, and she's not mincing any words about it. So that's that image of her. I believe she's speaking at the UN about how serious this is and how she wants legislators to take it seriously. This is probably not the kind of approach you're going to take as a 501c3. If you do get down that road or you're feeling like that, you might want to talk to the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits about, should you start a 501c4 where you can do lots of lobbying, limitless lobbying. So on the bottom, as a comparison, say you want to take a more cooperative approach, you're just getting started and you don't want to come out the door so aggressive, even though your issue is important enough to be aggressive about. Those kids on the bottom are some that I've worked with through this driving is exhausting local campaign. So they decided to just take a smaller piece of the climate change problem and make it something that they could connect with parents about and say, hey, parents, please quit idling in our school parking lots. You know, when you get to the grocery store, try to turn your car off right away. They just did a kind of public service announcement style. And there they are doing their happy presentation at WCHL on the radio, having great fun. So you can kind of think about your organization and what kind of approach you want to take, and probably having a good conversation with your staff and board about, as you create this advocacy campaign, what kind of tone are we going to take? Then decide who your best messengers are. So again, there are those same kids in the top right. Often we ask our executive director, who's perfectly poised. This is my Shutterstock executive director here on the left, to go talk to the media or talk to a legislative person or a policymaker, decision maker, or we ask our board or staff to go to the media interview to talk about our organization. But as in the upper right, the students make a really good messenger. They're kind of the clients of that campaign that they're running, and they send a really good message when it comes to the client. So think about who your best messengers are for your message that you're trying to send through your campaign. Then start thinking about the tools that are most effective for telling that story. We all are becoming better and better at telling stories because we realize that's the best way to communicate an issue. You do need to include some data and some facts. Those are really super important, but it seems that getting to the heart of the matter through storytelling about real people's lives is the way to tell your story. And then deciding how to get that story distributed and who to distribute it to. So you can absolutely create social media campaigns and be strategic about how that storytelling will reach people. Can we tag certain people? You could absolutely tag, use hashtags like the NCGA hashtag that legislators follow, that media follows. You can use media sources. You can offer op-eds and letters to the editor. You can also provide training. So if you think about social media, often you post things and your audience is, not always there for you right when you post something. So pulling together some volunteers and training them about, we're about to have this great campaign, here's what we're educating about, and here are some tools for you to know about how you can help us get that message out through social media, or do a media interview for us, write an op-ed, write a letter to the editor. Often just asking volunteers to do that isn't as effective as if you were to offer a training and really give your supporters and your clients the tools they need to come through for you, and then they will, with a little nudging. All right, so that's a little bit about our tools for advocacy. There are no perfect tools. There are so many things out there you can do. You can text your supporters, you can text your donors, you can text. Those texting platforms are really cool and evolving. Social media and finding out where your supporters are and where are the people that you want to be talking to. So when it comes to digital advocacy, you've got your website, you've got your social media channels. You want to make sure that you think through all of those things when you're working through your advocacy plan, just like you would a normal communications plan. And just think about, as you're thinking through, who are the people that need to see this when I post it on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter? Is this also appropriate for our LinkedIn post? And how can I tag my legislator or use a hashtag that the media is following, tag specific media, offer a press release? Think of all the different ways that you communicate digitally and work that into your platform. You're also already hosting events. So you're hosting fundraisers, you're probably doing some community education events. So think about possibly raising your advocacy by hosting a community forum. So those don't have to be partisan at all. You can talk about issues that are impacting your community without speaking about specific legislation. You can invite legislators either to be a part of a panel or to be in the audience. That's absolutely something you can do for your organization, not only to educate your population of your community that follows you, but also in that meeting, you'll be educating legislators and policymakers. They'll see the number of people in the room who care about your issue, and they'll hear personal stories throughout the night through questions and different opportunities to hear about those issues. So hosting events like that can be another way of ramping up your advocacy. Attending meetings. So of course, you're probably sending your ED around to fundraise with top donors, potential donors, and you're probably have some other organizations that you work with that you make sure you're meeting with, and your schedules are super busy. I know that. But think about, can you get your ED, your board member, or a client who you're working with to set up a meeting with a legislator. Think about how you can, obviously you can make an appointment. Going down to the legislature and sitting down with your legislator is not lobbying if you're not talking about specific legislation. You can go down and you can educate them and talk about your issue, answer questions that they have about the unmet need that you're working on, and leave them with a fact sheet. I think when you go down there in person and make that effort and leave them with a little bit of information, that can go a really long way into helping them kind of help your issue raise to the top of the many that they're dealing with in Raleigh. So that kind of broaches on those educational materials, leaving a leave behind or a fact sheet for a legislator or a decision maker. Some postcards that you can send. Postcards can be great for either mailing to your supporters or to decision makers. Maybe you decide to mail something to everyone at the legislature that talks about your issue and educates them. Or it can also be a leave behind that you keep with you in your briefcase and or your backpack. And when you have a one-on-one with someone, you have that great little leave behind that you can share with them that talks about the current campaign that you're running to educate about a particular issue. And of course, harping again on the media and just developing those relationships with one or two people at the outlets where you can. The news, I know news is all digital now, but there are still newspapers, radio, and different sources that you can reach out to get to raise your issues to the top and make your voice be heard. Finally, let's talk about building partnerships. So we talked about how Greta is different from those kids who are doing more of the collaborative approach. So just because you decide to take the collaborative lane doesn't mean that you don't that you can't know what the more aggressive partners are doing, because it kind of takes all of those different voices to pull all the levers to get to the right people and raise all our voices in different ways to make things happen. So so build your community of like-minded nonprofits and make sure you're coming together and talking. If you're going to run a campaign on a certain issue, let them know you're doing it. Maybe they would run their own campaign in their own way with their own style, either more aggressive, less aggressive, but in a complementary way to kind of just raise up the conversation. If media or legislators are hearing an issue being talked about through multiple sources, then it's becomes suddenly a more newsworthy story. So keep building those partnerships. It's also a great way to share resources, right? Because you can't be all things to all people. So you can reach out to your supporters, they can reach out to their supporters, and together you're reaching a ton more people. Okay, now we're getting to my favorite part of the conversation. We're going to talk a little bit about civic engagement, because I think that as you think through your advocacy plan and how you want to speak up, the baby steps for me, but the super important baby steps would be just connecting with your community about civic engagement. So one really super important way that you can encourage your supporters and your community to be involved and raise your advocacy is to encourage them to register to vote. Yes, registering to vote is a nonpartisan activity, as long as you're not saying, are you a Republican or a Democrat, and only registering if they answer a certain way, of course. So you have to be fair, but you can certainly register voters who care about the issues that you care about, which would be all of your supporters, right? So you don't have to go stand on the sidewalk with a clipboard. You can put this in your newsletter. You can share it on social media. There are a couple of really important things. Well, first of all, folks who are supported by nonprofit organizations are often the folks who need a lot of help connecting with voting resources, right? They move a lot, or they just came to the state, or they are in an at-risk group and they're struggling with a lot. And so your supporters, your clients are people who are likely could really use this information, and your board and staff and supporters are likely to be super proud of you for doing it. I'll be super proud of you for doing it. So a couple of things to really let your community know about, in particular this year, is the DMV just released the opportunity to do online voter registration. So if you already have a driver's license, you can just go into the DMV portal and update your registration, because remember, if you've moved since the last election, you have to update your voting registration at your new address. So letting folks know that, because I think that process seemed a lot more complicated before, and people are very excited about this opportunity to just go online and update my voter registration. Boom, I'm done. So you could send that link out. You could create a whole campaign around that to just kind of get your feet wet with this new level of advocacy that you're exploring. The other thing to let voters know about, and voters is not partisan, voters is the electorate, and that's all of us, and we all matter. So you're not breaking any rules by talking to voters proper. So you want to let them know that voter ID is currently not required. There's a lot of confusion around that, because there was an attempt to require it, and then there was a lawsuit, and after a while with all the lawsuits, people start, sort of glazing over and saying, I don't remember what the last decision was. So right now for 2020, you do not need a voter ID to vote. And I know, again, back to our nonprofit organizations, the clients that we serve are often folks who maybe are older or have moved a lot and don't have an ID. Perhaps they don't have an ID to use at all, or one that they don't think will be sufficient, or maybe just understanding the process, right? So letting them know that that is not something that's required could be a great campaign for you guys to kind of get your feet wet with. So I super encourage you to talk about that. So one other thing to think about as we get closer to 2020 is, especially if you get closer to the election and you want to talk less about a particular issue, if you're at all worried that it's an issue that's going to come up on the campaign trail that you want to be careful with your messaging about, is perhaps to encourage your supporters. I think you're going to see a lot of people pushing for absentee ballot voting this year. I don't know if our state will get official mail your ballot in voting, but that would be like where the government sends you a ballot and then you send it back in an official way. But there are processes to vote using the mail system, and that would be absentee ballots. So you're going to see a lot of changes coming down the pipeline as far as sort of, will early voting happen in person? Will it be longer? Will it be shorter? You'll see a lot of people encouraging voters to do absentee ballots, request them and get them back, because that's absolutely an acceptable way to vote. And all of those things will be confusing to people, including your clients and supporters. So just kind of staying close to your county's Board of Elections, which is a government site. There's nothing partisan about sharing that information. Just kind of look at what your county Board of Elections or your state Board of Elections is sharing, and you can pull that, share it in a very non-threatening way for your organization, and it's a real service to your community. And of course, having an electorate that votes more is going to be great for your mission and your organization. Another great opportunity to start and launch your advocacy through your organization would be educating about the 2020 census. So it's super important for everyone to be counted, and it might help them want to be counted if you let them know how your organization is impacted, right, by the census. The more people in our community, the more we realize the diversity and richness of our community, and also helping folks understand how the census would impact your budget from federal funding. And so just letting your constituents understand how important the census is can be a really fun way to say, hey, engage and be counted. All right, so we're going to sum it up here and leave lots of time for questions and answers. So back to our beautiful little arrow graph. We have no electioneering on the left. We don't want to collaborate with a candidate. We don't want to collaborate with a party. We don't want to give either of them our money. You can talk separately about how you want to handle that for yourself personally if you're the executive director or a primary staff person. You can give a donation privately. That will be reported if that's a problem for you. You can also work on a campaign privately yourself in person, and maybe just let folks know that you're here as Mary Parry and not as executive director of. There are other questions that could come up, maybe if y'all have questions about can my executive director offer a candidate endorsement? They can as a private citizen. Often you have to be careful to let that candidate know if you don't want to make sure that they don't put your title with your name, because they'll want to. So be really clear about that if that will be a problem for you. And lobbying, sometimes lobbying up to a certain limit. If you're worried that you are going to be talking a lot about legislation and moving the ball for your organization through those activities, then contact the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits and ask for help getting linked up with an attorney to help you figure out the right paperwork to help you track your hours and dollars spent. And then of course, where we really love to live is advocacy, which you can do anytime, all the time. And that's just educating everyone and really just opening up who you're talking to with those educational materials. And hopefully those are big, powerful decision makers, legislators, your mayor, your town council, your county commission, folks that hold the purse strings, and folks who make those decisions about policies that impact your clients. And so I'll just wrap up with, if anyone has questions about how can you create an advocacy campaign about voting, if you're worried at all about diving into that realm of encouraging voting and civic engagement, where do you find the resources? There is a great link that I will try to put in the chat in just a minute It's about it's a nonprofit organization helping nonprofits talk about voter education. There's a lot of great tools out there you can use, and I really encourage you to make that part of your activity, put it as a tab on your website, share it in social media, all the things that you would do. And now I will open it up to questions. If anyone has a question or wants me to go back over a slide, if I spoke super fast, I hope I did not.
They did great. So people can ask questions in the question queue, or you can raise your hand and I will unmute you.
You have the power.
Yeah, I love the advice about advocacy. I think that's the thing that, in contacting legislators, like there's nothing wrong with just telling your legislator what you do, right? It's not even, you're not asking for funding, you're not asking for special treatment. It's just like, just tell them what you do. And because they're real people. They're real people who care about real issues. So yeah.
And they have so many issues in front of them all of the time. And you think, oh, they're super smart. They're elected officials. They know all about issues. This is just, they have a ton of things on their plate, a lot of voices in their ear. And seeing someone who they're not used to seeing come in their office and talk to them is pretty powerful.
Yeah, and I think it is the job of every nonprofit that your local legislators know who you are, right? That
Absolutely.
Because also, like, how valuable would it be that if they are facing legislation, they contact you for information about the issue, right? It goes both ways, that you become an information source too. And as long as you're not like, oh yeah, well, on that one bill, like once you talk about it, once you just talk about your mission and your community and your constituents, that all this stuff's legal. Like well,
you might even find that you develop that relationship with the legislator, and when they're discussing it on the floor at the NCGA that they want to hear from an expert about that issue, you can absolutely go and do things like that.
Yeah.
You'll find that they attend your fundraisers because you know what? They figure out that you have a lot of people who listen to you and they want to be among you. There's nothing you can do about that. They can certainly give to you. You cannot give to them.
Exactly. So. Yeah. Yeah, and it's great to have legislators at your events and things like that. It's really nice to have that. Yeah, people learning about your mission. So yeah. Okay. We got one. Hannah asks, there are varying levels of appreciation for the role of communications and advocacy among staff at my organization. So I love the varying levels of appreciation. I think we all know what that means. Can you talk about the best way to get buy-in from everybody and get everybody on the same page?
Okay, Hannah, really good question. I've served as a communications director at local nonprofits. I've felt that frustration myself. I think that the best thing you can do is try to educate about your role. I think a lot of people know what they want you to talk about, and they underestimate the amount of work it takes to produce a really good campaign. So doing a little educating, maybe taking some time out of board meeting or staff meeting to educate, or maybe have a guest speaker about how all the different things that go into creating a really good campaign. Maybe also showing a not so great campaign and comparing it with a really good one, and talk about the number of hours or dollars that you need to produce that. But I think that's super common to be told, we don't have enough money to hire someone else in communications and development because we've got all this program stuff we've got to hire for. You're like, but we need more fundraising and communication so we can do that work. So it's tough. Just build good relationships with your board and staff and talk just honestly about what you need, what you want to do, and how you want to raise the bar and bring them along with you. That's the best thing you can do.
Great advice. Yeah, it's yes, amongst your coworkers is always a good one, right? Okay, well, we don't have any other questions or hands raised, so any other kind of closing thoughts that you wanted to share?
I really appreciate being here today. I think about all our nonprofits and the work they're doing, and how I think leaning into the rest of 2020 and 2021, we're really going to have to collaborate together and share resources, and certainly will be at the top of legislators' minds as they think about, as we get through the election cycle and they think about how we can help this post-COVID-19 kind of community that we're all trying to keep working and filling gaps in. So stay super connected, reach out, whether it's my business or other communicators are always willing to give a pro bono hour to brainstorm. So reach out anytime. Everyone knows that you're going to be struggling to, people are struggling at the independent level, but their individual level, but certainly our nonprofits are essential to our communities and to our state. So just know that if you need support, to reach out, and during this kind of crazy time of creating Zooms as fundraisers and things like that, if you just need an hour or a half hour brainstorm, to reach out to someone who's contracting for that extra support, like for you, Hannah, to just get some ideas, and just know that everybody is thinking about you, and we love the work that you do, and we so appreciate it. And thanks for having me here today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, and thanks for everybody for joining the webinar today, and have a productive afternoon. Bye, everybody.